in terms of talking about good mental health and well-being, community is obviously key. And it's really interesting, I think, that lots of the space around adventure, there's a lot of community in it used and created in different ways. So we have the brilliant Andrew from Wild Strong. Some of you will have done some workshops with him and Jill. Kelvyn, Mental Health Northwest, and obviously already touched on community, so we know a little bit about that already. Nadia is from Adventure Queens, and Andrew, we met earlier, from Black Dog Outdoors. And I shall just get straight on with some questions. I'll ask a few questions, we'll see how it goes, and feel free to ask some questions at the end as well. So, please introduce yourself. I've just done that. But maybe you could do a little bit more. Please introduce yourself and what you do, and explain why you think communities are such a powerful model for creating change.
Okay. Am I mic'd up okay? Is that, can you guys hear me? May I borrow yours? Oh, yep. There I am. Hey, okay. Yeah, so I work for an organization called Wild Strong. And basically, we come at everything from the point of community. If anyone has done the workshop that we did earlier, one of the things we try to look at is we try to look at sort of every single aspect, sort of borrowing from a PERMA model that people need to sort of thrive. And, whether it's positive emotion, relationship, achieving that sense of flow, sense of reciprocity, sense of achievement, all these different aspects it sort of takes for people, not just to be happy, but to kind of have that sense of eudaimonia that we were talking about earlier. And one of the things that we sort of identified is a lot of times when people want to do physical activity, a lot of times people think of, going to the gym or doing exercise or something, and that's just such a constrained, narrow view of everything that, movement and physicality and being engaged with your environment can entail, whether it's helping people move, or whether it's, going out and foraging food or anything. All these things that sort of make us human are embodied in movement. But a lot of times it's very hard to access that, and I think the fitness industry has a lot to answer for, because they've really fallen into this trap of credentialism, of making you think that you have to get X amount of certificates every year so that you can just go out and have a nice time with your friends. And, it's really, you don't need to, it's really just about going out and playing with the people around you and sort of normalizing that in a community, sort of finding and creating a community that allows you to do that. Because, if you go out and you sort of want to play on a playground by yourself, if you're an adult, or if you want to go climb a tree or something, that feels quite strange. It's a really big jump. But if you can find some other people and you say, hey, do you want to go outside and just start doing stuff and moving and seeing what happens, it's amazing what comes out of that. And then out of that movement, these other things will emerge. You start to develop these sort of mutual aid and support networks. Once you start moving outside together, maybe you can start an allotment, or maybe you can do make a WhatsApp group where you can do uniform clothing exchanges, so you don't have to pay too much money for your kids' uniforms every year. But these little things that only come together when you see each other eye to eye and face to face, as opposed to just trying to do everything on a computer screen, which is great, and it's a great organizational tool. But there's a real magic that comes from being outside around each other in a sustainable way, so these long-term communities can form and sort of mature with time.
Great answer, thank you. Kelvyn?
Cool. I think the thing's working. So I touched on it a little bit earlier. I see community as the last stage of our therapeutic model. So I'm dead happy to talk about me. I think a few of you know my journey. When stuff was bad for me, I identify as a climber, maybe a mountaineer on a good day. And I thought that would fix it. I thought I would go and write my story on the north face of the Eiger or whatever. And I did, and it quietened stuff for a little while. What fixed me, and if you're allowed to laugh if you know me, what got me as close to being fixed as I'm ever going to be was other people. It was the people I sat on a belay ledge with. It was the people like Charlie who wrapped their arms around me and told me I was part of a larger thing. So when I look at our therapeutic model and who we work with a lot of people who are isolated. They're not part of a community. And by that I mean they're maybe in Cumbria physically isolated from people. Their village has become a village that's just holiday homes now for rich talk. No, I didn't say that. But they've become physically isolated. Or maybe they're emotionally isolated because they're just not in a place where they can go out and engage. Maybe they're psychologically isolated, that they actually don't believe they deserve to belong. And that's the last part of what we provide. So access is actually easy. That's just asking people for money. Well, it's a bit tough, but you can make that happen. Belief, other people believed in me, so I'd be pretty poor not to believe in other people. But community, when they choose to identify that way, that's where the magic happens. So if you haven't got a grasp of community in your project, your passion, your endeavour, whatever it is, ultimately I don't think you're getting to that last stage of benefit for people. It's got to be the forming glue for me.
Great. So maybe a little bit of background about what Adventure Queens is, and then I'll answer the second question. So we're a not-for-profit organisation that supports women to go on outdoor adventures. And really we were set up in recognition that at least 6.5 years ago, the outdoor industry was really very heavily male-dominated. And also women face a unique set of barriers to getting outdoors and going on adventures. So Adventure Queens was really founded on a community, bringing together women to share tips, to share advice, to support each other, to cheerlead, and to join each other on going on outdoor adventures. Today we've grown, so we currently have 3 pillars of activity. The first is our community. So we've got 15,000 members across the country, across 25 regional groups. And we're not an events provider, so our events are all community-led, volunteer-led, really bringing together and sharing skills. The second pillar is our Adventure Queen grant, which supports 3 women each year to go on a life-changing, boundary-pushing, human-powered adventure. And we do that through providing cash, kit, and mentoring. And the third pillar is our projects. And the reason we set up this final pillar of projects is we recognised that Adventure Queens as a community was self-selecting. So we were only getting a certain type of women, and women who were already kind of on their adventure journey. But we wanted to support women who were one step further removed. So we set up these dedicated projects to provide tailored support for women to be able to join our community in the long term. The reason why I think community is important is, as human beings, we're reluctant to change. And I think a lot of the time, if you think about what time of year we're in now, in January, a lot of us might be setting New Year's resolutions, new things that we want to do or things we want to do more of. But it's quite difficult to make that change in the long term. We might stick to it for a week or a couple of weeks. I can see a lot of people nodding. By mid-January, we've dropped off. But what having a community does is it builds in mechanisms to enable you to keep doing those things. So I like to think about it in terms of kind of four aspects. So you need to think that the thing that you want to do is actually a good idea, and ideally have it validated by other people. You need to have the knowledge and the skills to be able to make it happen and do it effectively. Ideally, you need some sort of accountability, so someone asking you, did you do that thing you said you were going to do? And then finally, having a group of people to do it with is also kind of a form of accountability and additional form of support. And communities can do that. They can enable all 4 of those things to happen. And so that's why communities really create this long-term change within individuals and enable them to not just be adventurous for a couple of weeks or a few days, but actually build adventure into their lives in the long term.
Andy Higson, Director of Black Dog Outdoors, and I can hear myself, that's great. And we provide free outdoor activities for people affected by poor mental health. So led by qualified outdoor professionals, supported by mental health first aiders to create a safe and educational space to rekindle a passion for the outdoors that people may have lost, or to help them overcome some of the challenges that prevent their participation. And what we've seen through our work is a growing community on our own online social media platforms and others. And the one thing I always take away from that community space when I dip in there and see what's going on is people supporting each other through shared experience, whether that's them talking about their emotions and their feelings and normalising the conversation per se, or whether they're inspiring people through things that they're doing, they're overcoming their own challenges and broadcasting that far and wide to inspire others. Or the most gratifying part for me is where you see people that come on our events forming their own support networks and going out on their own adventures. And that's the legacy piece that you were talking about, Kelvyn, is people coming in with these preconceived ideas that they can't do it because of X, Y, and Z, having a great time on the hill, meeting like-minded people, and going off and continuing. And that's why community is important for me and Black Dog Outdoors.
Thank you, all of you. Those are lovely ways, slightly different, but probably very harmonious ways of describing why community is so good. Can you describe? Would you like to share a story? You don't all have to, but is there a nice story that sort of exemplifies how someone who's come to your organisation, how that might have worked well, or maybe hiccups along the way, or just a good example, really?
I'd love to share one. That's okay. I've got a couple, but one of my favourite ones is a woman who she'd actually applied for our Adventure Queen grant last year and was unsuccessful. But I got in touch with her and I said, actually, I love your adventure idea. Why don't you try and get feedback and try and get support from our community? We've got 15,000 members. There will definitely be people who want to support you. So I said, post in our group and tell people what you want to do. And this was a woman who said she had ADHD, she was autistic, and she has children with special education needs as well. So had really struggled to kind of make time for herself. So her adventure was going camping, one night camping. She'd never owned a tent, she'd never been in a tent before, and that was her plan. So she posted in Adventure Queens as a group and said, I really want to do this. And within, I think it was half an hour, we had 60 people respond to her. And they did kind of all those things that I mentioned earlier. They kind of validated her idea. They said, yes, this is amazing. You should definitely do this. Camping is one of my favourite things. They gave her tips and advice. They said, yes, you can get a cheap tent from this place, and you can get this other equipment from here, or I can lend you these things. They also said, we're having a camp out ourselves in May. We had a big Adventure Queen camp out. Why don't you come along to that? And they said, they had the final thing was the accountability. So had she bought her ticket yet? Was she going to come? And this woman then came to this camp out. She met everybody. And then she, just a few weeks after the big camp out, she then went off and camped completely by herself. Something that she'd thought was completely unimaginable before then. And I really love her story because she's still a very active member of the community, even though now she's going off and doing things with her family. She maybe feels less of a need to come to our events. But she's now wanting to get involved as a volunteer for Adventure Queens and actually looking at how we can improve diversity within the group and kind of specifically focusing on people who are, for her, on the autistic spectrum and thinking about how can we make our events more inclusive from that space. So for me, it was kind of like a complete journey of someone who didn't have the resources, didn't have the knowledge, to now wanting to give back to the community and support others. So I really
wow, magic. That's exactly what we're looking for, isn't it? How do we replicate that 100 million times? Thank you for that. Anyone else got a
similar story of an attendee that signed up to, I think it was our first mountain walk on Skiddaw actually in the Lake District, and this particular attendee drove up and she wound her window down. She said, are you Andy? I said, yeah. She gave me a name and I said, I can't get out of my car, but thanks for the invite, but I'm going now. And she just drove off. I was like, crikey, that's okay. So I dropped her a note afterwards. I said, it's okay to feel that way, don't let that put you off, booking onto future events. And bless her, she did. She booked onto a climbing event in Windgather in the Peak District. And again, I could see her sat in a car. She was crying. There were tears rolling down her face. She desperately wanted to get out of the car, but she couldn't bring us. We managed to coax her out of the car with Haribo and a promise of hugs. I was carrying an emergency bag of Haribo, and that worked. And she didn't partake in the climbing, but she sat at the crag and she chatted to people, and she went away. And long story short, about 12 months later, she asked whether we could support her going through a mental health first aid qualification. So we actually supported her by paying for it as a bursary. And she now comes along on our events as a volunteer to support and give back and make sure that she's the one at the back with a person that doesn't want to talk to anyone. She gets them involved. So that's great seeing her come full circle through that wow. process.
Oh, thank you. Wow. That's just, I'm going to share this because it just made me think of it. When I've been leading a different size adventures, whether big expeditions or small, I didn't know how to put it in words at the time, but I actually like having the challenging guest or participant or client, because those are the ones that give you the greatest satisfaction in your job, in what you do. And I think it's something to hold on to, isn't it? Because I think a lot of organisations and definitely a lot of companies on the more tourism side of things, they think, oh, yeah, this is too much. The guides don't want the tough customers. They want the easier customers. We actually do want the tough customers. That's the golden stuff. And that made me think of that. Thank you. That's a wonderful story.
I was just wondering if I could answer.
Yeah.
You know, I think when you work in the space, you end up with all these really, amazing stories and these case studies. And, I can think of, one of our members who's about 60 now and came in like very meek and didn't want to, touch anything and is, quite shy but very friendly. And then just over the course of the year, of just going outside and being active and moving things and running and jumping and all of a sudden just feeling, really, really capable. And then, eventually came to us and said, I'd like to do the coach training. And, there's loads of stories like that, but, I think we had a good example of it. We recently moved from Reading up to Scotland, and our first group around Reading, we didn't know how it was going to survive after we left. But all the people in the community, all the people, and the person I was just talking about, who kind of had come up and become coaches through this, they said, you know what, we're gonna try to take this over. And it's just sort of normal people. It's people who never would have thought themselves as being coaches or guides or whatever. We have some teachers, an anesthetist, I think an accountant, and after we left, they were able to keep the group going. And I think it's really amazing when you see that narrative shift in people, where they think, oh, I'm not that kind of person, or I can't do that. So all of a sudden, they feel like they have the tools and the confidence to take charge and keep that sort of legacy, that community going. And I think it's the stories like that where you see that continuity that I always find really affecting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And although I set up Explorers Connect in a slightly different way, and I was finding my way a lot because I did it so before all these other communities were set up, and I made lots of mistakes because of that. And I wish I'd left a bigger legacy in some ways, because some of the model was unsustainable because it was too much about me at the sort of doing all the stuff to keep it all together. However, having stepped out of a lot of the things that I was doing, there is still this legacy of communities all the way around Britain who are just doing stuff together, and I love that. And I think that that's really important, and Kelvyn's touched on this idea of legacy, and because if the money dries up, or if the volunteers dry up, or if the the resources dry up, we need, and I know this is a model that you use as well, and in fact all of you are kind of touching on this model. Where am I going with this? How do we when we're building things, how do we make sure that we can empower people enough to make that sort of change that you've just described?
Yeah.
What can we do? Are there top tips or examples?
I'll just jump in because I was thinking about it. A lot of it is what you said. I think that when we try to start these things, we try to give so much of ourselves, and you do kind of end up being this nexus point where, like all this joy and all this challenge and all this heartbreak and, all this growth and everything, it comes through you. And sometimes it is, it takes so much energy to do that in a good way. You can grow a lot from it. But sometimes the challenge is sort of coming up with a way to take yourself out of it. And one of the things that I found that's really important is there needs to be a sense of reciprocity in the community in order for it to be a community and not a service. And what I mean is that, it can't just feel like a transactional thing where you give me X amount of money and I provide the service, is really sort of kind of having the courage and the confidence to ask for help from the people within the community. Because, if we go back to the PERMA model, the idea of relationship, it's not just having people do things for you. It's having a sense that you can do things for other people. And I think a big part of it is showing people that they can be useful, they can be helpful. And once, kind of like your comment, once you can get people to come out in the rain and know they're not going to melt, once you can get other people to put themselves in that position to say, I can lead this, I can take charge, that's when all those connections start forming. And that's sort of the hard part is trying to find that system where you can have this sort of peer-to-peer, bi-directional kind of dynamics where like everything can come together. because otherwise it is really hard if you feel like you're at the top of the pyramid or the middle of the spider's web or whatever. You know, it's just so hard, and you're not going to be able to do that forever. So finding ways to keep it going is the real challenge.
I think if I could just quickly add, so I think also if people feel like they're getting value from your community, they'll want to give back. We had an Adventure Queens volunteer weekend just a few weeks ago, actually, and one of the questions that we asked all of our volunteers was, why did you initially get involved as a volunteer? And I think everyone, as part of their answers, said that they'd got a lot from the community, they'd made friends, they'd built skills, they'd built confidence, and so they wanted to give something back. And I think that's really powerful in itself, and it's something that's come up in a lot of the presentations, is that idea of giving back.
And how, we might have answered this, but I'm just wondering, because I'm trying to almost do something with Adventure Mind, but having learned all the lessons from Explorers Connect. And what's lovely about Explorers Connect was how it was wonderfully life-changing, and I just, it's a very positive part of my life, and but I also didn't get all the things right. I'm still wondering, yes, understanding this PERMA is a really good way of looking at it, actually. I've never thought of it like that. This idea that relationships both ways, and recognising that people are getting a lot from your community, and therefore and not being afraid to ask, I think, is a big one. I was better at that towards the end, which is why, thankfully, I was able to keep so much going that if I hadn't, there would have been less continuing in without my input now. But is there some other ideas as well? Just any other thoughts on that, or just simply the recognition that you have to? I mean, what I'm doing with Adventure Mind is I'm simply starting this time with building myself out of it as quickly as possible. Like I'm always going to be interested and engaged and giving up my spirit at any time I can. But I have to be able to. I need to be redundant as well from projects as quickly as possible, because everything, you know, for sustainability and for it to continue, it should never be about. There should never be anyone in the picture that can't have some time off or be reflective.
Single point of failure, I think we call that in project.
Yeah.
You've got
Is there anything else there? I mean, is there?
Well, I'll give you an anecdote for that, because that's how Kelvyn learns, is by anecdote. So I often say for people, we do arrange what we call big days out, so we'll rock up with a minibus somewhere, collect you in a community centre, take you out. The hardest bit is being stood there, yeah? So the things I've seen that make that work are the groups start to bond, and they'll ring each other the night before. They'll know the person who's a little bit jittery, because I'm not part of their community ultimately, or their lived community. And they'll ring, so I'll rock up and there'll be 6 people there, and a couple of them will be really, really nervous. And it's a minibus or a people carrier, and there'll be a little squabble that I'm aware is happening about who gets to sit in front of me, because they know me and they trust me. So that goes on and it goes on. So I rock up one cold, wet, horrible November day, and it is biblically bad. I mean, if anybody stood there, they're getting cake. Well done, you're a hero. There's all 6 people are there, and they all get on and they all pile in the back, and I don't really pay any attention. Everybody happy? Everybody got everything good to go? We'll just go and see what we can do. Nobody sat next to me, and just as I'm clocking that, a voice from the back goes, "Somebody should sit next to Kelvyn, he'll get lonely." That's success right there. Everything after that is great. That's success right there. So that's the bit you want. It's painful because it's you disappearing from the picture, but actually that's a functioning community there.
Well, it's like Nadia's story as well, isn't it? It's that helping people, empowering people. And also getting yourself out of the picture.
The other little anecdote in there is we have a young adult in care who's wonderful, just perhaps not that great with tech. So I'd worked out, I need to be doing other things. So I'd sent Beth, who's one of our directors, to do their regular walk. And Scott, the young lad, put on the Facebook group, I can't remember the lady's name, the other Kelvyn was really, really good today. And somebody else put, all the other Kelvyns are good. It didn't make me feel that valued, but hey.
All the Kelvyns are good, I agree. We were talking about how these great stories, these success stories, and definitely all of you guys are running communities in very good ways, I think, and in different ways. maybe just starting with you guys and the stories you told, how did you make that happen, do you think? How did you win I mean, you touched on some of that already, or maybe with different stories. How do you keep trust? How do you hold people and also help empower them? Are there any extra information you could add to that, or thoughts or experiences?
Yeah, I think for us, in terms of building trust, it's come up a lot over the last couple of days. It's about showing vulnerability. And I think that's something that we have as a common thread through everything that we do, through our engagement with all of our volunteers, our community members, the sort of comms messages we put out there, the blog posts. We probably get people to talk about their failures more than we do talking about their successes. And I think that in itself makes adventure and getting outdoors and being part of our community a lot more accessible. Because I think also for myself, I'm quite open in the fact that when I took on this leadership role of Adventure Queens a couple of years ago, or 2.5 years ago, the first thought in my mind was, okay, how do I leave my day job so I can do it full time? But my second thought was, what are people going to think? I'm not adventurous enough to run a women's adventure community. And I think actually being vulnerable and being able to kind of say this to our community members, to our volunteers, and say, well, actually, most of us feel like we're not as adventurous as everybody else. And I think that is really important to kind of build that trust. And I think that's why people keep coming to our events and keep talking. And actually, sorry, this is a slight tangent, but I really like this story. We had an event just a couple of months ago at a campsite not far away from where I live called a Nearly Wild Camp Out. And I came home from the weekend, and I just said to my partner, I said, I'm completely knackered. And he said, oh, why did you do a lot of walking? And I said, no. And he said, did you not sleep very well when you're camping? I said, no. I said, it was just completely emotionally draining, because within the first half hour, we'd already covered topics like divorce, relationship breakdown, personal life fears. And I think when you create this environment where you share your own vulnerability and you create an environment of trust, people just open up. And when they feel comfortable, when they feel like they trust the other community members, they're more likely to keep coming. And they then replicate this with other members, and it just kind of grows from there. So for us, that is really key, I'd say.
Yeah, and you're right. It's that authenticity, isn't it, that comes from not being the best at everything, not being a superhero, just being human, just having a lived experience. We always make sure that whoever's coming on our events in the info pack, there's a little bio about the leader, you know, what they love about the ideas and why they're passionate about the ideas and about being there for the attendees. And I think that tries to set the scene before people turn up. And then, as you say, just having those compassionate conversations with people and active listening and just not being judgmental, not being I'm not allowed to swear, I'm not going to swear, not being a dick, you know, just not being a dick, just being there to support people without being too judgmental or offering support. And yeah, that shared experience, that authenticity. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we worked out quite early on. Make it theirs. So my definition of adventure might be slightly different to your definition of adventure to that person. We're never going to get that right. So put them at the heart of it. And what I've really enjoyed the most, I think, in the last 3 years is the people who were participants who then went on skills courses and then have gone on to be leaders. And we've asked them why. And not a one of them has said the thing I thought it would be, to the point where I don't have any preconceived idea about it now, because it'll just be something totally different. And quite often it'll be the throwaway comment. Just that one time you told us we didn't have to get to the top. I've got one of our volunteers who literally looks for flat things, so there's no pointy bits, so people, which is fabulous. Had to explain some of the coastal paths really hard. It's not flat, don't do it. But make it theirs, empower them to do the thing, and then they'll be invested in it. If you try and make them mini-yous, it's not going to work.
It's very much like in development, youth development expeditions. It was facilitation. I mean, many of the youth development expeditions, it's all about you might have to be quite a in charge leader at the start. You kind of you have to make them feel safe. There's enough competence that they're not going to die in this completely new environment. But really, you failed if by the end of the expedition they're not running it. You're kind of sitting back, just kind of there for the odd question or something. No, so it's similar processes. Oh, yes. All of you seem to be doing a lot with a very little. And this is all about small adventures, or maybe accessible adventures might have been a better title. Accessible, small adventures, small amounts of resources, but big impact. Can you talk about that? You know, because obviously, I mean, there's never going to be loads of money sloshing about, and we are in a cost of living crisis, particularly at the moment, so it's particularly hard. But have you got any thoughts on
Yeah, I can
resource
answer that.
management?
So years ago, I had a whole career. I don't talk about my business career. Went quite well. I remember somebody saying to me when the lottery had just started, what would you do if you won the lottery? So I'd perfect my tennis game. He's like, I didn't know you played tennis. I don't, but it's better than working for you. If you ask me that question now, I'm doing exactly this tomorrow. So that's not that I'm saying, it's that I love what I do. So if I've only got a certain pot to do what I do, I need to find ways to stretch that pot. But you do. If you like what you do, you make it work, don't you?
Yeah, we had no money as a charity for the first couple of years. It's one of the strange things about becoming a charity is that you need to demonstrate that you've got income to become a charity. So you spend your first couple of years saving up to demonstrate that you can bring in £5,000 worth of income over a 12-month period, so you can then be a charity and get more income. So it's quite challenging. So we had no money, but we ran 9 events in our first year and 24 in the second, and willing volunteers, people come and volunteer their time if they get it. If they understand what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, and it resonates with them, they'll come and support, and you can get an awful lot done with nothing. And walking, outdoor sports, outdoor exercise, you don't need thousands and thousands of pounds worth of equipment to do those things. So, for attendees as well, it's real good entry level stuff. Yeah, you can stretch nothing a long way.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of, when Anita was giving her talk about the adventure playgrounds yesterday, it kind of struck me that like our communities and our sites look like that. We've got old boards and tires and bits of log and just bricks and stones and things like that. And you make that work. You realize you actually don't need a lot of the fancy stuff. You can make do with that. We're sort of unique, I think, with some of the organizations here in that we're not a charity, we're not a CIC. Mainly because I'm really bad at paperwork, and I just realized that I just wouldn't be good at getting the grant funding and everything, and I would drive Jill crazy because I never get my emails out on time or anything. So we're like, well, what's the smallest sort of business that we can make work? So I would say officially we're a for-profit company. We don't really make much profit, but we kind of things tick over. And sort of what we try to do is we try to identify people who would like to start a community, would like to make it accessible to people and not charge too much. And we have scholarship programs. If payment is a barrier, we try to make sure that everybody can engage in it. But we do, generally if people show up, it works out to like £5-8 a session, depending on where you come from. And we just make sure that the person who's running the communities makes enough money so they have extra food for supper, so that they can buy more gear, so that they can maybe go on an extra holiday or something like that. You're not going to get rich off of it, but it's something that you can do, and it all of a sudden it gives you a job where you're not doing computer work, you're not doing emails all day, you're not stuck in a factory setting, you're outside engaging with people. And for us, that's how it's been sustainable, is just to try to keep it small, recognize that nobody's going to get rich, but just try to make sure you maintain enough resources so that you can sort of grow and do things that way. And that's been a model that's worked for us, because in a lot of ways it's been very freeing in that we haven't had to worry about, I think you did a good job talking about this, but we haven't had to worry about navigating funding cycles and applications and spending most of the time doing that. We get to spend our time outside with people, and then if we do a good job of that, then we have enough money to do it next month and next month and next month. So that's been the way that we do it, which I know is different from a lot of the organizations here.
No, I think we have to. Everyone's different, and every situation, opportunity is different, and we have to. We have to be aware and be able to use all sorts of different ways of achieving what we're all trying to achieve, the same thing. And Andy, you're just. It's a slightly off the cuff question. the way that you run Black Dog Outdoors is very connected to a community around the Trail magazine, isn't it? Did you get involved with Trail magazine and then they were able to? It seems to have been very, very beneficial, like a pre-existing community.
Yeah.
Well, only because I'm thinking like people who might not want to create their own communities here but are doing great things, they might want to like leap into someone else's community and create a partnership or something. How did that work?
It was hugely beneficial and just timing. It was all in the timing that we'd started Black Dog Outdoors and we'd just started to run events. We'd gone from being the signposting website to getting boots on the grounds and actively helping people. And that coincided with Trail magazine thinking, we'll start this online forum for people affected by poor mental health to promote the benefits of outdoors. But they had no vehicle to engage those people in the outdoors. So it was a quick phone call between myself and Ollie Reid on a Wednesday night. I was at Rocked Climbing Wall in Brighouse. I remember the call. He said, "You fancy running events for us, for our community?" Sounds like a great idea. It's kind of moved on from there because there was so much synergy between what we were trying to achieve and what Trail magazine were trying to achieve. It made sense to align ourselves and move forward in that space, and that's led on to other things as well, because aligning yourself with organisations like that brings in credibility when you're just starting out as an organisation, and support from the BMC and mountain training has been incredible as well, just to add to that credibility, and that's what people see from the outside. They see you aligned with these big reputable organisations and you're taken a bit more seriously, and it's hard work, and sometimes you feel, not that arrangements with those people is a bad thing, but sometimes you feel like you're selling your soul. You're going out to make these alignments just to prove your worth, when all you want to do is get people out. But it is a necessary thing, and it's reciprocal as well. It helps support other organisations' aims as well. It's just another thing to do as a small organisation.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I think it's been quite pivotal for you guys, and I think it could be for other organisations if you can find the right timing, partnership, aligning of values and missions and so on. I think we're going to go to some. Is there anything you guys want to say, or any questions for each other? Otherwise, we'll go to questions from the floor. Bit of a specific one at the end there.
You have to do the running thing, Belinda.
Yeah.
We've demoed.
Yeah. Okay. You're right. Actually, there is only two, and you're all mic'd up, aren't you? Who's up for a question? I know it's late.
Hello. It's not really a question. It's a bit more of a statement. Ooh, scary. I'm just thinking there, sat here listening to this and looking at you people around here, that 23 years ago when I was diagnosed with PTSD, this wouldn't have happened. And now how good is it that we're talking about community here, and we've got this community that are all putting your time in, and Belinda, Adventure Mind, these guys. So give yourselves a bit of a pat on the back. It's not a question. You should do. Okay, that's it. I'm through.
Well, thank you.
Hi, this was for Adventure Queens. You were talking a bit about how you have vulnerability in everything that you're doing. How does that play with confidence in being good at what you're doing as well? Like vulnerable and confident at the same time, how does that work for you?
Good question. I think actually having that vulnerability helps kind of set a benchmark for being good at something, if that makes sense. So if you acknowledge that everybody starts somewhere, the progress can be made from there. So like if I think about how we talk about vulnerability through our blog posts, for example, we'll have people come in and they'll talk about failures on their adventures, but usually the story has a happy ending. So they might not have done what they set out to do, but in the end they were able to use their creative thinking, able to think on their feet, make changes, make decisions, be independent, and adjust their adventure to something that maybe they hadn't even imagined it to be. So I can see how the two might initially seem to be contradictory, but actually I think they're quite complementary, because it kind of shows how you can kind of build on past, I don't want to say failure, because it's not necessarily failure, but past struggles, and go from there. I don't know if that really answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. Like learning opportunities, basically.
Yeah.
Using them to show both I'm confident, I'm good at this, and I was vulnerable and I'm learning at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think if we've got lots of inspirational women within the Adventure Queen community, and if you have lots of women that I look up to and I think, wow, they've done these incredible adventures, and then for them to share their failures, their vulnerabilities, their worries, their concerns, that kind of shows that yes, you can actually be an expert in your field. You can be, a renowned athlete or climber or whatever it is, and still make mistakes and still struggle with self-confidence and struggle with imposter syndrome, as so many of us do. So I think that really helps build confidence in others that may see themselves as being alone or unique in their feelings of self-doubt. But actually, if these incredibly impressive women are also struggling with that, then they feel like they're not alone.
Perfect. A sense of community as well. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think a question for all of you. So I used to work in palliative care and long-term conditions and got really interested in kind of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, and did a lot of training in the NHS and voluntary world with that. And I just come here and I see so many people like yourselves with so much empathy for the people that you're working with and what you're doing. And I'm just really interested in how you protect yourselves from all the stories that you're hearing and the positions of vulnerability that you're putting yourselves in. So how do you protect yourselves and also protect your volunteers and the people that you're working with?
One of the things, for us, when you run a community for a long time, you do, as you said, you have that vicarious trauma. You do hear really harrowing stories and really sad stories. And I think one thing that helps is if you're part of a community, you can sort of distribute that. It doesn't have to be all the grief that's just coming to you. It depends on the structure of your community. But because most of what we do is in sort of like a circle sort of area where we kind of talk, and we kind of have the space where we share how we're doing things like that. And we do have that element of trust. It means that it's just not one person taking on the burden. It's very much like the village helping out. Wendell Berry has this quote, and it's the smallest unit of health is the community. And I think one of the issues is that we're asking so many people to do things by themselves and take on this trauma by themselves. And whether you work as a nurse or a therapist, coming home at the end of the day and not having, and I'm not talking about breaking confidentiality, I'm just saying not having anyone to share those emotions with. Whereas if you do have like a healthy sort of community where you can share that, it doesn't have to be the burden of one person. And I think that makes the biggest difference, again, is just sort of making sure you have your own support network. And, if things work out, maybe the community you work in is your support network, depending on, the dynamics of it. And we're very lucky because I know that, if I'm having a tough day, then I feel like I've got a group of other people I can talk to and help me out, and I don't feel like it's one directional. And I think that if it all went in one direction, I think it would be too hard for anybody.
I think that's the whole point of having it. When I said about community, the community starts with us. So if I was going to be really cold-hearted about it and look at it from a business point of view, I want to maximise my productivity of my volunteers. To do that, I need to look after them, and that's emotionally, physically, psychologically. So we have a check-in process. Quite often I'm not involved, actually. I just discover a little chat's happened in the forum, and they've been okay with it. But it's a large part of our training of our volunteers that they know that support's there. There's always an anecdote. It's me. I've been a Samaritan for a long, long time. And I remember telling them 30 years ago, I thought my strength was I'm unflappable. I had a rough start in life. I'm a mountaineer. I'm the person you want to see come over the horizon. It took till 3 o'clock on the first overnight shift for me to go out and throw some bins around. And there's always going to be something you're not prepared for, you've not encountered before, that's too close to home. So the more support you can wrap around that, the better you're going to be. And I'd like to think that's where our community starts, in looking after the volunteers so they can look after everybody else.
Yeah, similar. All of our volunteers are mental health first aid trained, and we have WhatsApp groups in various ways where we can sort of debrief, if you will. That's a mountain rescue term, isn't it? But yeah, where we can just chat things through and share that burden. Yeah, it's quite important, and respecting boundaries as well is a big part of that, and knowing when to tell somebody, look, I appreciate you sharing that with me, but I'm now well outside of remit. You need to go and speak to somebody more professional. Yeah.
Thank you. I heard that, but it was community. Community was the thing that came out first, which just kind of sums up a lot of what's been said today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Any more?
Thank you. I'm really curious about your volunteer turnover. I think it kind of links to the last question, because the challenge that I'm finding with my organisation is that people want the service to continue, they want the work to continue. I'm only able to be here because one of the participants for my sessions today offered their time to cover the session that I'm delivering today, so that, the other people didn't miss out. However, in the sort of like VCSE sector, the voluntary sector, it's not sustainable a lot of the time. A lot of the people that I work with aren't people who have a regular job that pays their bills. That means that they can give up X amount of hours. So a lot of the time, the work that I'm doing is hopefully trying to build up a position that people can be paid for eventually. But it's a real struggle, and we understand that struggle. But I'm curious, first of all, as to your volunteer turnover, as to how long is it that people are usually staying with you, and how concerted is the effort to actually keep getting new people in through the door? Or is it not the case? Because I don't know if I'm perhaps missing a trick for longevity with my work.
You're probably not missing a trick. It's incredibly difficult. I think one of the things that I'm always looking to learn more about is how to kind of recruit and retain high quality volunteers who are really passionate about the mission of our organisation, but also feel like they're able to get out of the organisation what they want to. And that takes a lot of time. Like with Venture Queens, we've got over 60 volunteers now. My role is still a volunteer position. So for me to be able to coordinate those 60 volunteers, to check in on them, if there has, I'm listening to some of these conversations and thinking, yeah, it would be lovely to check in with every single volunteer after every event. It's just not enough time in the day. So I guess it's really about thinking about what are the really essential things to do, and actually creating a really strong volunteer community within your overall community. Because what we find is we've got some volunteers who've been involved since the organisation's inception, and that's because they feel very embedded within the community. They have friends within that volunteer group, and they also feel like they're having an impact. Because I think what can be quite challenging, especially in our context, we have our volunteers that are putting on events, and we've got a couple of volunteers here today as well. And sometimes you organise an event and some people don't turn up, or you maybe have just 1 to 2 people turn up, and that can be a bit demoralising as a volunteer. So I think it's really important for us as kind of facilitators or coordinators or leaders of these organisations to actually remind our volunteers that, yes, you only had 1 person turn up to that event, but that person had one-on-one engagement with you. That could have even potentially had a bigger, deeper impact than if you'd had 20 people turn up. And actually getting them to think through, what sort of impact they're having from their own individual volunteer role, and how that's linking into the overall organisational aims and objectives. But I'm very happy to chat to you about it. We don't have all the answers, but I'm really interested in kind of talking about it and hashing it out.
I think we're waiting for that to happen, so touch wood. So far we haven't lost a volunteer, but we're fairly early doors. We have a transactional relationship in theory, that we provide training, they pay us back with a certain number of events. Every single volunteer that's got to that point has continued to deliver works because it's beneficial for them. And I think that's the little piece that often gets ignored. We look at the end participant, but a lot of our volunteers have come through the programme, so to speak. Also, I think I was really, really clear about this earlier. I will not pay tax to Richie, so I buy them things. So I buy them CPD. So if you stick with us, tell us what extra development you want. We'll find that course. We'll invest in you because you're investing in us. And as you say, they're not always getting a wage back for it. So look after them. They're absolutely the heartblood of what you do. So, you know, I can get another minibus. I can probably browbeat somebody to give us some jackets. My volunteers are the beginning, the middle end of us, so I invest in them.
Yeah, it's slightly different from us in that the vast majority of our volunteers are people that have come through from activities and events, so they wanting to give something back. So we do get a churn of volunteers, but it's only because it's that. Yeah, I want to help out and can I go and support this walk, this event, and that's great. They come back as often or as few times as they like.
Yes, and communities evolve and people graduate. We used to talk about the people who graduate from Explorers Connect because almost they've gotten everything they could out of it, and now they don't need us, and that's kind of a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd say, because I don't know what sector you're in, we're a really, really supportive community in this room. So I think there are a couple of people in this room that have done stuff that I know isn't their commercial rate for us. Certainly we'll come out and provide training to other organisations if they want. So we'll support each other. So actually the cost of investing in people probably isn't the headline figure. I'm probably not going to charge you what I'd charge Richard Branson, but we'll kind of support each other.
Great. Thank you, and that's a lovely sentiment to finish on. Let's support each other. Thank you to Andrew, Kelvyn, Nadia and Andrew. 2 Andrews.